Welcome to Pop Culture. We're talking comics today. I'm very excited, as you can see. Let's get started. Alright, so I want to talk about Fables, which I hope you've enjoyed. I mean, even if it's not your cup of tea when it comes to the material you usually read, I think it's valuable. That's why I chose it, because it illustrates a lot of the things that we've been talking about so far in a more theoretical level. So the ideas of intertextuality, ideas of motif, aesthetic, building on previous materials and holding on to certain traditions while changing or I don't want to say improving, because that's not necessarily what's happening, but definitely updating it in certain ways, as you, I'm sure, saw in the comics. So just to get us thinking a little bit more about comics, I want you to do a few activities. It's on the website, as you can see, but I'm going to encourage you to do it as we're talking, or as I'm talking here, and you can pause the video, of course. So first, I want you to just describe your day in words. Describe your day so far. Not super complicated. You know, I would appreciate maybe 5 sentences, something like that. But go ahead, and if you want to pause the video and do it right now, or if you want to do it after, it's okay. But yeah, describe your day sort of like a journal entry. Now, hopefully you've done that. You've paused it and completed that. Now, what I want you to do is take out a piece of paper and draw your day. And I know that sounds weird, and if you don't like drawing, then too bad, it sucks to be you. I'm not a very good drawer at all. In fact, I'm not even sure. I may or may not put up some of my diary drawing, like, for this activity, just to show you how shitty I am as an artist, and so you won't feel bad. But I want you to do it so that you realize how the different media help us communicate and hinder our communication, right? Because you can say things through words that are very difficult, perhaps, to draw, and vice versa. You can illustrate things that are perhaps difficult to put into words. And so it encourages us to think in 2 different ways. And comics, obviously, they use both, right? They use words and they use images. But you'll see in this small activity that just, a few things that you've done today, putting it into words versus putting it into images can be very different in terms of what you emphasize, what you explicitly and implicitly put in, right? Because when you're drawing, you kind of have to do some kind of background, whereas if you're writing, you're probably not talking about the background. You don't have to choose colors when you're describing things in words, usually, but you usually do, unless it's black and white. Even so, you're dealing with some of the visuals that you don't need to talk about when you're really just describing your day in words. So anyway, pause it, draw something, and let's start again in a second. Okay, so hopefully you've done that, and if you haven't, make sure you write down and you draw. It doesn't need to be anything crazy personal or anything profound, but how did you find recollecting your day so far in words and then in images, and what did you learn from that activity? I want you to think about that. Now I have this image from the beginning of the comics, and I want you to tell me where this takes place. In your own words, where does this take place? So I like to have usually conversations about this. It's kind of weird to be recording because I don't get to hear your first thoughts. And anyway, we'll just go from there, right? So there are different ways in which you can interpret this, right? The comic takes place on the page, so you can get physical with it, the materiality. You have a physical comic, unless you're doing it online with like a Kindle or something, and then you have a Kindle device. But either way, you're looking at ink on a page or pixels on a tablet, and so that's one place that it takes place. You're also dealing with Fabletown, right? Which doesn't exist in real life, but it also does exist in this book, or else how would these characters be doing anything, right? So you can think about Fabletown. You can think also about the intersection of Bullfinch and Kipling, which is kind of what I want to draw your attention to, right? Because just as in the earlier activities, you had to make certain choices, and if you did it quickly, you probably didn't make a lot of informed choices about the aesthetic you're using or the diction that you're choosing. But the artists and the editors and the writers and everyone involved in comics, especially good comics, I'm talking good comics here, not shitty comics, they think a lot about what they put into this stuff, right? So why would the creators of this comic make the intersection Kipling, and Bulfinch. Any idea? Again, I wish I could just hear your answers because I'm sure they're interesting, but I'll just give you mine, right? I actually found this book. I fucking hate going to those antique stores, but sometimes I'm dragged into them, and it's a horrible experience. Except this one time in Blairsville, I found this book, which is, as you can hopefully see, Bill Finch's Age of Fables, or Age of Fable or Beauties of Mythology. So this is actually a classic mythology and history of fables book, and it's written by a guy named Bulfinch. And so that might be, in fact, I would say that that's almost guaranteed to be why one of the streets is Bulfinch. The other one, I don't actually have the book here, but hopefully you know what book I'm talking about or what book I'm going to mention. Kipling, does that ring a bell? Right? Yeah, the Jungle Book guy. So Rudyard Kipling wrote the Jungle Book. He also wrote a bunch of stories like how the leopard got its spots and how, I don't know, I forget all the details, how the elephant got its trunk and all of these, right? So he has these cool little stories that he became known for. Maybe you read them as a child or maybe your parents read them to you. But when you think about it, why would, and this I won't answer because I want you to answer it, what would be the purpose, the benefit, the thinking behind making the intersection of this street Bulfinch and Kipling? Now that is just one example of many things you can find in the story. And one of the great things about comics and about storytelling in general is that you can layer it so that, yeah, if you don't see any of this stuff, especially your first time around, you probably didn't, fine. You can hopefully just enjoy the story. But that's also why I would encourage you to read it more than once, because the first time you're worried about, who is this character and what is he doing, what is she doing, what's the plot. The second time around, especially in this, because it's done as a murder mystery, almost like a noir in some elements of it, you are worried about, who's the killer or how did this happen. Once you know that stuff, or once you think you know that stuff, maybe there's stuff you didn't notice the first time around, then you see things, elements like the Kipling Street little sort of like an Easter egg, right? Like if you're paying attention, you get more out of it. And that's, to me, always a sign of good pop culture, where if you are watching a movie, the first time you're thinking, wow, that's a cool movie, I enjoyed that. The second time you're like, oh shit, that is why that, the scene happened in that way. And the third time, and maybe even, my favorite films and my favorite books, a dozen times later, I'm still seeing things. And so this is one of those comics that is definitely a lot of thought is put into every picture, every word, and it is layered. So yeah, you can enjoy it. You don't know anything about pop culture. You're an alien from outer space who somehow reads comics. You can get stuff out of this. But if you study pop culture, or you think more deeply about pop culture and the implicit and explicit values and meanings, you can get so much more out of it, even the third, fourth time you read it. So I'm putting some more questions about the comic that I want you to try to answer, and we'll talk later, but one thing I want you to do is think about what might be interesting to further pursue and to actually come up with an argument about, because that's your second assignment for the class. I want you to use this comic and do some background research once you've decided what you want to focus on. So maybe you want to focus on Red. Maybe you want to focus on the mythology of the big bad wolf. Maybe you want to think about snow. All of these are fine. You can think about other elements as well. You might want to think about the way certain scenes are done visually, or maybe the pacing of the story in general. Maybe you want to think about how it fits in with the noir genre, the genre of like the hard-boiled detective who, is sort of rough and gruff, but also kind-hearted, or at least he's not as corrupt as the society in which he works. All of these things are things that you can think about and further pursue for your essay. It's weird as well, being online, because I normally encourage people to collaborate. So if you have a partner that you want to work with, you and her or him can do research and write the article or write the little essay together and hand it in together. So I'm still saying you can do that. I know it's harder though, because you might not know as many people and you might not be able to communicate as well with other people. But yeah, there's definitely the opportunity in all of the assignments to work with other people, because collaboration, someone will say, hey, did you notice this? And then you'll realize that you were missing something, or you realize together that there's more to it than what you originally thought. So that's always a cool experience for me to see and for me to partake in when I do research. So anyway, do your best to answer these questions and think about what you might want to pursue more. So maybe you see this jingle from an old-time fable that you recognize, or that seems familiar maybe, and you want to ask, like, why is that there? What purpose does that serve in the narrative? And why put this little Easter egg, or why put this little tidbit of information in? And then you want to try to answer that question, and your essay will be the answer that you found by doing some additional research, maybe by looking up some medieval stories, or by looking up Kipling's work maybe, or whatever the case may be. So we can talk more about that, and of course I'm happy to answer questions, but I want you hopefully to enjoy what it is you're getting out of this. So like I said, the first time around you read it, hopefully you enjoy the story. But the second time around you realize there are more layers to this, and then the third time you just keep going down, right? And you can think about some of the things we've read, the clarification of implicit and explicit meanings and values. It's obviously an important thing here. The visualization of culture, which Hall talks about in terms of youth and adult in the reading that we did, but also Freud obviously talks about the way that we will take ideas that might be, you might be able to write them as an essay, but then they're visualized so that they're transformed in certain ways. And obviously comics are a great example of that, because you're taking things and so they're transformed in a way that, there's animals, talking animals, there's magic, there's all of this stuff, but it's also a collection of all of these things in popular culture that you've seen and that gets put together in this story. Very much like your dreams are collections of events and ideas that you have, some of which you're trying to work through because maybe they're difficult for you, others you're just processing because something big happened today and you're just thinking about it, it's on your mind. That's how the comic works too, right? It takes things, it condenses them, it transforms them, it sometimes inverts them, and there's this identification going on. So much to talk about. I could take a long time doing that, but I won't. I'll stop it here, and I look forward to seeing your responses. So enjoy.